and we'll move right into our question and answer period, okay? So they're starting with that one in the chat. Let's see. Geoff, did you want to read that one, or?
Yeah. Before we answer that question from Andy, though, 2 questions. I just want to also kind of build on what Luisa was saying at the end of her presentation about changing lives. One of my students, who is a senior and kind of at a stage where she's really looking at what she wants to do, has actually kind of changed her minds and has decided she actually wants to go into astronomy. I have another student who went through it with us that he's younger, but he is actually, he was thinking he wanted to go into science research, but not necessarily astronomy, but he's actually thinking of steering toward astronomy now. So it's true. The program does change lives, and
it changes lives of teachers too, not just students.
Yeah, but it's made me a better planetarian.
Good.
So the question from Andy, how did you settle on a particular topic of research with the astronomer? For us, it was a little unique because the 3 years that came before us, they had been working on a similar project, and each year they were able to build on the success of the previous participants. And especially with the year ahead of us, they had some technological issues that caused their research to be limited, and which is a great lesson in how astronomy research goes. But it also made Varjan want to continue, now that everything had been fixed, to finally go in and try to get some of these really faint sources that hadn't been detected yet. And
so all scientists do things differently. Varjan tends to do lots of cross-year projects, but he's an extragalactic astronomer by trade, for lack of a better term. So a lot of his projects are extragalactic. I'm a galactic astronomer, and I run my teams differently than he does. So I usually come up with 3 or 4 ideas that I think will work, and I present them to my team at the AAS, and they pick at that point what they want to focus on, and then we get started. But because I'm a galactic astronomer, all the projects I suggest have to do with stars in our galaxy, and almost all of them have to do with star formation, because that's what I do. But yeah, the teams get run differently depending on the scientist mentor, what opportunities they have, what data they're playing with, what ideas they have, all that good stuff.
And then the second question was, why were you surprised that most stars were on the main sequence? Were you expecting younger stars? I was actually expecting a lot of evolved stars, much farther off the main sequence up and to the right. And the fact that they were as close as they were was surprising.
Yeah, because the infrared excess is probably coming from circumstellar dust. And for young stars, that circumstellar dust is residual from the formation of the stars. But in evolved stars, that's dust that's forming in the atmosphere. So, in either case, they shouldn't be on the main sequence. So the fact that they're on the main sequence is interesting.
Any other questions?
I had several questions actually, but I'll start with a simple one first. When there are students, how many students are there per adult participant? I mean, I hear what you said, that they don't have to have any students, but
right.
How does that usually turn out?
Usually every teacher learns differently, and so we respect them, and if they want to learn without students, that's fine. If they want to learn with students, that's fine. Some teachers are just fine sitting next to somebody, half their age and learning side by side, and some teachers aren't, and that's fine. So some years, lots of teachers bring students. In fact, we budgeted for the Hawaii trip, because it was Hawaii for last year's class. They went, gosh, I don't even remember where the first WS was, Texas, I think. And then the second one was Hawaii. And so we budgeted a lot of money thinking that every teacher was going to bring their full complement of students. But we had very few students on both teams. So we pay for up to 2 students. They can bring up to 2 more. specifically the summer visit is where that 4 student limit is pretty hard. And if you want to bring a van load of kids to the AAS, that's on you, man. That's totally fine. And different teachers work differently. Some teachers have designated research classes, and so they see their kids every day or every other day. Some teachers meet at lunch, so they see their kids either every day or every other day or once a week. Some teachers have after-school projects. I've had teachers work with groups in excess of 50, and I've had teachers work with 1 or none. So it varies tremendously depending on what the teacher wants to do.
And Peggy just added a question related. How did I pick my students? And luckily I didn't have to. I put the invite out there, and the students that joined us, were self-selecting because I didn't have more than 4. I had 5, but one of the students, his parents weren't really keen on him doing any traveling. And so he was not able to go to either California or Hawaii. And that made it so I didn't have to select.
So you didn't have to do any interviewing or competition between kids?
If I did have to select, it would have been based on their level of participation and how seriously they have been taking the research. But
so yeah, so every teacher again does something different, but I've had teachers hand the kids a journal article and say, summarize this. I've had teachers give, because they have to write a proposal for the program, right? So that they take that proposal and give it to the kids and say, okay, summarize the proposal for me. Sometimes they have interviews, sometimes they have essays, and sometimes, like with Geoff, it's self-selecting. I had one teacher apply a couple of years ago at the urging of some of her students. And so at the beginning, she had a classroom full of students that self-weeded down really fast to only 3 kids, because surprise, it's not just fun trips, it's actual work. And so very, very quickly in her case, the kids were like, oh, I'm out. So.
Yeah, one of the first things that we did that really tested the tenacity of our students was diving into actually reading and trying to understand actual astronomy research journal articles. And that takes some work. And if you're serious about it and you want to learn and participate, you'll stick with it. And I was impressed and pleased that all of my students did. And just to kind of build on something that Luisa said, some teachers are comfortable, learning side by side and researching side by side with the students. And it is humbling because, you have to admit that you don't know stuff and that you're learning too. But I found that to be very engaging, and it was motivating for the students too. They even mentioned the fact that they thought it was really cool that they were actually, working at the same level as the teachers and contributing at the same level. It was cool.
I had a question, Geoff. You said that it changed the way you do things as a planetarian. What specifically do you do differently now than before?
Well, it's probably changing my perspective, because when somebody is asking about how astronomy research is done, I now can speak from an authentic experience. I can't speak to all research, but I now have experience that informs my answer. And when research comes out and you read some headline and you read this article that is a summary of some research that was just presented in a science journal, I now have the confidence to actually go search for that source research and actually see for myself what they were saying, because so much of the summary that we come across in our day-to-day consumption of media, it seems a lot of it's clickbait, and having the confidence to actually go in and look at the actual research was a major impact as well.
Yeah, that's really important.
Alan, questions?
What was that, Luisa?
Alan said he had more questions.
Oh yeah, yeah. I wrote down several questions. It seems like a critical question for planetarium people is how, if they're going to apply, is the question that you talked about, Luisa. So how will I forget the exact phrasing of it,
How
but
will you
how will
share?
the experience be used?
Yeah.
And if you're not working with students, then what? You know, maybe you could give some examples of, have planetarium people come in and you know, not work with students. How do they justify their experience?
So there's lots of ways that you could share it. You could, smaller scale things like, hey, did you know that all astronomy literature, or 99.9% of it, is posted to the web free? So you can yourself go and get the article behind press releases and figure it out. There's also an online place called Astrobytes, which summarizes the recent journal articles in sort of a beginning graduate level, senior undergraduate level. And so not many people know about that. And so in the context of a planetarium, that then becomes something you can lean on to put up current events in your planetarium. It can be even simpler as, hey, did you know there's a lot of data that's available online? So you could run a class at your planetarium talking about how you access online data and how you actually work with FITS files and what are astronomical images, and there's no such thing as a color image and all that good stuff, right? That's something that you can learn about through NITARP and then share in your community. It doesn't always have to be that you work with someone, like with a student intensively for the whole year. You're still learning, like Geoff was saying, about how science works. And so that's going to inform the next time he has to share how science works, whether that's one-on-one with a student or as part of a planetarium show or as part of a public talk. That's going to color how he answers that question. And that's the longer term sharing. And I've been to Madison, I think, twice, although my sister currently lives there. So anyone in Madison that you talk to is probably someone I've never talked to. So there's already a built-in leveraging there, right? You're already reaching people that I won't reach. Now, it turns out Madison in particular has a lot of astronomers in town, and the AAS meeting in June is going to be there. So maybe that's not as good an example. But if you live in Norman, Oklahoma, there's not a lot of astronomy going on in Norman, Oklahoma, right? And so, that's an audience that certainly I will never reach that you can, right? And so just, come up with something that shows that you're serious about sharing something that you've learned from this experience with that community at any level, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That sparks a lot of ideas. That answers the question well. I'm reminded of a presentation that someone did at the Western Alliance Conference, the WAC conference in Omaha last summer, that was about community programs. Mm. And the reason I remembered that is because the after school program for students that I think Geoff mentioned was, that's a community program in a way. Yep. And so I'm wondering, that leads me to actually another question is other than presenting a paper at AAS, do the students make presentations about their experience, or
we leave that to each teacher? We certainly in the past, we've had lots of teachers who have their students present to the school board, for example. There was one teacher who ended up going to their state capitol and presenting to legislators, just as a, pro-science kind of, it was part of a science day that was being held at their capitol. Yeah, it depends on what the teacher and the students want to do.
I can tell you what we're doing.
Yeah.
Next month, our public planetarium programs are, we've titled Exploring the Invisible Universe. And most of that's going to be infrared astronomy and sharing our experience in NITARP. And so we're putting together a little, probably 3-minute video of the students explaining our research, and that will be part of the Planetarium program. And so far we've got 3 almost sold out shows, and another that's mostly sold out. We'll probably have 5 or 6 sold out shows that we'll be presenting.
Excellent. Drop that into an email so I can put it on the website.
Oh, I will be. I decided I'd produce the video first before, and then I can share that too.
Good sense.
We're also presenting to the school board, like you mentioned, and that was an invite that came out. And so we'll be doing that either at the March or April school board meeting. We're also presenting to the local Madison Astronomical Society, amateur astronomers. We already did do a brief one to let them know about what we were doing. And then they said, well, you know, can you come by and tell us about the research when you're done and about the experience. And so that's why we're going back.
Excellent.
So yeah, they're doing presentations, and that has been one of the ways that they have grown the most, because these, except for Isaac, the other students were fairly timid and a little overwhelmed with the thought of having to speak publicly, and yet they have grown so much in this program that they still have a little bit of that, you know, nervousness, but then they go right into kind of teaching mode.
That's pretty much a universal conclusion, right? Is that most of the kids are a little bit intimidated, and then most of the time they step up to the plate. There was one year where the students on my team gave me a freaking heart attack, and it wasn't until they were actually at the AAS and I asked them to present what they'd done that they realized how little they knew, which whereupon there was 24 hours of complete panic and 3 hours of practicing with me, and then they felt better and I felt better that they were going to do it. And I don't know what they did when they got home, but yeah, most of the time they rise to the occasion really well.
Geoff, I like that you made a program, that Planetarium. That's one thing that I was thinking when you were showing the slides of the particular, you know, the pretty slides of the SEIP sources and the Gaia parallax and the Simbad graphic. I thought, that might make a nice thing in the planetarium, you know, for some kind of presentation. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of the infrared excess, you know, being able to detect dust clouds or bands, the concept, you know, is intriguing, you know, for people to learn about. So I think Planetarium program material is a great use of it.
And it's really cool for like multi-wavelength astronomy, right? Because you can take an optical image and fade it into the infrared or the X-rays or whatever, and you do a full dome version. It looks really cool.
And we will be.
Actually, I had, you know, another thought occurred to me. This probably, I'm pretty sure this is off the wall, but I remember there was a person who worked at Lawrence Hall of Science who applied for time on the Hubble Space Telescope, and he got time. It was a sort of a time of opportunity that they would notify him when they had something. It was to detect Oort clouds around other stars. And it seemed like, well, is that related to this dust? It's probably different, but it's kind of
similar. Yeah,
there's
been several people who are trying to find Oort clouds, and for that matter, Dyson spheres, using infrared data. Nobody's found anything like that yet, but certainly there's stars that have, let's see, how do I explain this? So I know, Alan, you know this, but I'm not sure that everyone does. So when stars form, start from a big cloud of gas and dust, and because of the way physics works, it doesn't all just fall radially in. It falls into a disk first and then spirals into the central object. So that disk all going in the same direction and flat is how you get a planetary system with planets all going in the same direction and flat. What's left of that disk is the Kuiper belt, and what's left of the original natal cloud is the Oort cloud. So comets and leftover bits from the formation of our solar system. So there are certainly plenty, if you have enough dust, either from collisions in the Kuiper belt or the Oort cloud, or further in, then you can get a measurable infrared excess. And when Spitzer was still taking data and still had cryogen, there is a spectroscopic instrument on board, and the spectrum that it got of this one particular belt around this star looks indistinguishable from, gosh, was it Hale-Bopp? I think it was Hale-Bopp. So it was the same chemical constituents as giant ass comets in our solar system was in this belt, right? So we were seeing either the Oort Cloud or the Kuiper belt for this star. And then there's another one where the only solution to the absorption lines that you see is obsidian. So that was some giant collision between two planetesimals that resulted in obsidian. So yeah,
that's weird.
Isn't it?
Obsidian?
Yeah, isn't that cool? Yeah, so remnants of some massive rocky planet collision you can see in the spectroscopy.
I knew I was asking the right I didn't realize I was asking such a right person for that question.
Okay, more questions about NITARP or science or anything else? Because I know you wanted to keep this to less than an hour, right?
Yeah, we have some time. You know, that JPL tour, does that vary from year to year, or is it pretty much, I mean?
So there's a finite number of places you're allowed to go. Varjan gives a tour. He gives a great tour. He works at JPL and he's officially sanctioned. He's got the stamp of approval from the tour office. So where he can go, where he can take you, and what order he can take you in depends on what the other tours are doing that day, but also what's happening. Like I said, the spacecraft assembly facility no longer has Mars 2020 in it. You know, as far as I know, there isn't anything being assembled in there now. So I don't know if he's going to take this year's team or not because it's empty. He might take them there to say this is where it was. And certainly there's a whole bunch of impressive looking logos on the wall for all the missions that were assembled there. Yeah, it depends on what other tours are there, what other special events are happening, and what's happening where, right? Because if they're doing, you know, if they're doing some kind of, because the spacecraft assembly facility has a visitors gallery, but there are other places that you can go that don't necessarily have visitor galleries, and so it depends on what's happening. That dictates where he can take you.
One of my students, his dad actually does some work for people at JPL that are working on the Starshade project.
Oh yeah.
So we actually got a chance to have that be part of our tour as well.
That's cool.
Hey, Geoff, it sounds like you work directly with students, these students who went with you, but do you have relationships with local high school teachers too?
So my situation is unique in that I'm teaching, the planetarium is located in a high school, but I'm not part of the high school faculty. So I don't have any students of my own. I just work with students that want to come in during lunch for astronomy club. There is an astronomy class, but I have a teaching partner that teaches that, and he's actually on the faculty. But you know, one of my ways that I will be sharing my experience is with the science team there in the high school that I'm in, and with that teaching partner who teaches the astronomy class, who in fact applied to be a part of the 2020 team and got accepted. So now I'm kind of like watching their team do the research in the shadows like he did last year.
It's going to be totally different, right? Because he's working with me and you work with Varjan, so it's a totally different experience.
So now I get to learn from their experience.
Do you, I mean, so do you serve just that one high school, or do other high schools visit?
Because it's so convenient to just, you know, schedule a visit and walk down the hall to go to the planetarium, I do get you know, plenty of groups from the high school, but we serve the whole central Wisconsin area.
Okay, so that's like there's a planetarium in San Jose, the East Union High School district, that serves the whole city basically, so they would be involved with teachers from all around the city.
Yeah, we get groups from you know, mostly anywhere within like an hour.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in the chat room about how often you meet with students. Every teacher does things differently depending on what they need. We meet, my team meets once a week. Varjan's team often does. Sometimes there are some years he can only manage every other week. and different teachers have different things. Like there was a teacher I worked with for several years. She was a mentor teacher who lives in rural Oregon. And so physically meeting with her students was prohibitive because it takes an hour to get anywhere at least. So she would have online meetings with her students once or twice a week, in addition to the meeting with the teachers once a week. So, and then every teacher handles it differently. I've had, from the teachers who've gone through the program, the ones that have regular in-person meetings seem on average to be more successful than those that don't. If they're trying to arrange in-person meetings with people who are at a different school, those folks struggle a lot more. Mm-hmm. So in those cases, we recommend that you meet online, find some way of tagging up. And the students communicate totally differently. So I worked with one teacher one year who would email her students and then text the students to check their email. You do what you got to do.
That's what we did. And
kids watch their texts.
For our group, we did meet once a week, and like our local team met in conjunction with our virtual meetings. And so we would meet for a few minutes before the virtual meeting starts, meet for a few minutes after, as a way to kind of connect and do some of the logistics. But it was mostly those once a week meetings.
Did we hit all your questions, Alan, or did you have more?
Yeah. Well, those are the important questions. Did I see Tim Spuck in one of your early slides? He was one of the very first teachers we had. He's been with us since the beginning, and so he's one of the people for whom we can change claim at least a portion of life changing, right? Because when we met him, he was a classroom educator, and now he works not in the classroom, but for what is it? Not AIP. It's I can't think of the name. It's one of these astronomy subcontractors, and so he does education, and he's gotten lots of NSF grants and things. So he's doing wonderful things. But NITARP can claim some small portion of that life-changing in his case, because we broadened his horizons to careers he didn't know he could have. Yeah, I knew him from the Hands-on Universe project, and he had high praise for his NITARP experience.
Yeah, he's great. Okay.
Well, you know what? It's 3 o'clock on the dot here. Any last questions?
If you think of some later, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer whatever questions you have.
Should we put your email in when we post the video?
Sure. Or you can put my personal email at IPAC, or you can put literally the NITARP email, which is nitarp@ipac.caltech.edu. So either one works.
Okay. Well, everybody make sure you're unmuted, and let's have one more round of applause, because this has been a great experience.
Thanks for letting us share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, guys.
Okay, bye.
Bye.